Lisa sighed softly as she polished the glassware. The glint from the polished crystal caught the light, sending small rainbows dancing across the tables. Another long shift at the Edelweiss restaurant. It was the same as every other evening, a quiet routine that had grown as predictable as the sound of the silverware clinking in the kitchen or the murmurs of conversation from the guests. She glanced around the dining room, the opulence of it all never quite losing its novelty. The dark wood paneling, the lush, deep red velvet curtains, and the gleaming chandeliers all seemed to belong to a world that she, in her plain black dress and sensible apron, didn't quite fit into. The guests, mostly wealthy businessmen and their elegant companions, moved about with the grace of people who were used to getting whatever they wanted. Lisa had learned early to keep her head down and her movements efficient, quiet, unobtrusive. The more invisible she was, the better. As long as she kept the drinks filled and the food coming, they would forget her existence until the next time they needed her. But as Lisa went from table to table, she couldn't help but feel the faintest stir of something inside her. She wasn't just a waitress, at least she didn't want to be. In her heart, she was an artist. She could almost feel the violin she kept hidden in her small apartment, tucked away under her bed where no one could see. The sound of its strings, the way the bow danced across them, the melodies she played in the quiet hours of the night. That was where her true life was. That was the world she dreamed of, a world where she was more than just a servant in a restaurant. Her grandfather had been a violinist. He had taught her the basics of the violin, his weathered hands guiding hers as she learned the first hesitant notes. He had always told her that one day she would play on grand stages, the lights shining down on her, the audience wrapped in attention as she brought the music to life. "You have it in you, latte," he had said, his voice thick with the faintest trace of his past passion. "One day, you'll be up there with the best of them." But that had been years ago, and since his death, Lisa dream had been a quiet echo in the back of her mind. She had never had the means to pursue it. No money, no connections to get her into the prestigious music schools that could make a reality. And so, for now, she was here, in the dim glow of the Edelweiss, polishing glasses and taking orders, pretending not to care about the dreams that seemed so far out of reach. That night, as the final guests finished their meals and trickled out of the restaurant, Lisa felt a familiar heaviness in her chest. It was the exhaustion of the long hours, of the endless repetition, but also the weight of unfulfilled potential. She wiped down the last of the tables, her fingers brushing the cloth over the smooth wood, and with a small sigh, she turned to head out the back door. The cold night air hit her immediately, the crisp wind of Dresden biting through her thin uniform. She wrapped her arms around herself, stepping out into the quiet streets of the city. The glow from the street lamps cast long shadows on the cobblestone roads, and the city felt peaceful, almost ethereal in its stillness. As she walked, her eyes lifted to the windows of the wealthier parts of the city. The light spilling from their windows was warm, a stark contrast to the chill of the night. She wondered, not for the first time, what it would be like to live there. No more scrimping and saving for every little expense. No more worrying about paying rent or buying groceries. What would it be like to live without the constant weight of financial worry? To wake up every morning knowing that everything was already taken care of? She imagined a life where she could practice the violin every day, her only task being to perfect her art, not to spend hours running between tables. She imagined the sound of the violin filling a grand hall, the applause echoing through the room as the audience rose to their feet. That was what she wanted, but it was so far from what she had, so far from her reality. Lisa pushed the thoughts from her mind as she rounded the corner toward her small apartment. Her parents had already gone to bed by the time she got home. As usual, they worked hard every day to keep the household afloat, her father as a carpenter, and her mother doing piecework in a local factory. They were good, hardworking people, but they, too, had never known a life of ease. Their dreams, if they ever had any, had long since faded into the background, buried under the weight of daily survival. At home, Lisa dropped her uniform into the laundry basket and made her way to the small room she called her own. It was a tiny space, barely large enough to fit the old, creaky bed and a worn-out armchair by the window, but it was hers. And in the corner of that room, under a dust cloth, was her most prized possession, the violin. She pulled it from its case, her fingers running gently over the smooth wood. It was old, battered in places, and the varnish had worn off in spots where it had been played over the years. But to Lisa-Lot, it was more than just an instrument. It was a connection to her grandfather, to the life he had once lived, and to the dreams he had for her. The strings were cracked in places, but Lisa-Lot didn't mind. She knew that with each practice, she was one step closer to something greater. With a deep breath, Lisa-Lot settled onto the chair and placed the violin under her chin. She closed her eyes, remembering the lessons her grandfather had taught her. She could almost hear his voice in her head, urging her to keep going, to believe in the music. As the bow touched the strings, the familiar sound filled the small room, echoing off the walls. And for a moment, Lisa-Lot could pretend that she wasn't just a waitress, that she wasn't invisible to the world. In these moments, she was a musician, playing her heart out for an audience that truly appreciated her. Her fingers danced over the strings, and the notes flowed from her as easily as breathing. The music filled her chest, her soul. It was the only thing that made her feel truly alive, truly free. As the last note faded into the quiet of the night, Lisa-Lot opened her eyes and let out a slow breath. Her heart was racing. She was so tired, but the music had given her a fleeting sense of peace, a fleeting sense of purpose. The real world was waiting for her in the morning, with its routine, its demands, and its endless cycle of work. But tonight, for just a little while, Lisa-Lot allowed herself to dream again. And for that brief moment, it felt as though anything was possible. The next evening, the Edelweiss was more opulent than usual. The guests dressed in their finest. Laughter and chatter filled the air, and the clinking of glasses mixed with the soft melodies of a string quartet playing in the corner. Lisa-Lot worked with practiced efficiency, her mind distant as she moved between tables, refilling glasses and serving plates with the same quiet grace she always had. She had become an expert at blending into the background, ensuring that nothing disrupted the calm atmosphere of the restaurant. The guests barely acknowledged her presence, and that was exactly how she liked it. For Lisa-Lot, the less attention she drew to herself, the better. She was simply there to serve, a small cog in the grand machinery of the restaurant's operation. Her movements were smooth, her expression neutral, and her voice polite but unremarkable. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unexpected was about to happen. Her instincts were right. It was toward the end of the night when Friedrich Keller arrived. His presence seemed to command the room the moment he stepped inside, his sharp suit and even sharper gaze making it clear that he was someone of importance. Lisa-Lot had served him before, though not often. The man exuded an air of arrogance and entitlement, his icy blue eyes always scanning the room with an almost clinical detachment. He wasn't the kind of man who made small talk or exchanged pleasantries. No, he was there for one reason only, to be served, to have everything around him bend to his will. Friedrich had never shown much interest in Lisa-Lot beyond the brief exchanges when he ordered his meals, and tonight, he barely spared her a glance. But this time, he seemed distracted. His attention wasn't entirely on the conversation happening at his table with the elegant woman by his side. His eyes flickered toward Lisa-Lot as she made her way around the room, balancing a tray of drinks, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Ah, the invisible girl is here again," he muttered to his companion with a voice loud enough for Lisa-Lot to hear, though his gaze didn't meet hers. The woman laughed softly, her eyes gleaming with the kind of humor that stung Lisa-Lot's pride. She had heard such comments before, but something in the way he said it tonight made her bristle. Perhaps it was the casual cruelty in his tone or the obvious lack of respect he had for the staff, but she couldn't ignore the sharpness of the insult. With practiced composure, Lisa-Lot set the tray down on a nearby table and approached Friedrich's table, her eyes lowered to avoid making eye contact. She had no choice but to endure this, as she always did. Her smile was polite, her voice steady. "May I take your order, Mr. Keller?" Friedrich's gaze finally settled on her. There was something about the way he looked at her, as though he were sizing her up, that sent a small chill down Lisa Lott's spine. It was a look of amusement, but there was also something else, something darker that made her feel small and insignificant. "Tell me, Lisa Lott," he said slowly, his tone dripping with mockery as he pronounced her name. "Do you ever dream of something more than this?" He gestured vaguely around the restaurant, indicating the life she had built for herself. Lisa Lott hesitated, a flutter of discomfort stirring in her chest. She had been asked this question before, by well-meaning strangers or curious friends, but never in this way. Never by someone who seemed so determined to belittle her. "I have my dreams, Mr. Keller," she said quietly, keeping her eyes trained on the table in front of her. "But right now, this is what I do." Friedrich raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by her calm response. "Ah, so you're content with this, then? Just a waitress, serving people like me?" His voice was laced with condescension, though the glint in his eyes suggested that he wasn't entirely finished with his game. Lisa Lott's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had heard this all before, the dismissal, the ridicule. It was all too familiar, but something about tonight made her feel different. Maybe it was the way he had spoken to her, or maybe it was the memories of her grandfather's violin, still hidden in her tiny room, waiting for her to reach for it again. "No, Mr. Keller," she said, lifting her chin slightly, her voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty in her heart. "I have dreams. I just don't need to prove them to anyone." For a moment, Friedrich looked taken aback, as if he hadn't expected her to stand up to him. But that was the extent of his reaction. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass, as if he were deciding whether to indulge her further or dismiss her completely. "Very well," he said, the mockery still in his voice. "Since you're so full of dreams, how about you give us a taste of your talent? Show us what you've got." Lisa Lott felt a wave of dread wash over her, but she didn't flinch. She knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to humiliate her, trying to force her to fail in front of the other guests, to make her look foolish. It was exactly the kind of thing people like him enjoyed. But as she stood there, frozen for a moment, something inside her shifted. She thought of the countless hours she had spent practicing alone in her small apartment, the sound of her violin filling the quiet night. She had never played for an audience, never played outside the privacy of her room, but now, something felt different. With a slow, deliberate motion, she nodded. "All right, Mr. Keller," she said, her voice carrying more strength than she felt. "I'll play." The murmurs of the restaurant hushed immediately, as though the entire room was holding its breath. The guests watched curiously, some with smirks, others with puzzled expressions. Frederick's lips curled into a smug smile as he gestured toward the corner of the room where the musicians were usually stationed. "There's your stage, Lisa Lott. Let's see what you've got." Lisa Lott felt the weight of their gazes pressing on her as she walked toward the small stage. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled slightly as she took the violin from its stand. The bow felt heavier than usual in her grip, the sound of the strings echoing in her ears before she even played a note. For a moment, she considered walking away. She could leave the restaurant, walk out into the night, and never look back. But that wasn't who she was. She wasn't just the girl who served food and drinks. She wasn't just the invisible waitress in the background. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes for a brief second, focusing on the music. The sound of the violin was her refuge, her escape. It was where she truly belonged. With a steady hand, she placed the bow on the strings and began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, but they quickly gained strength as she became lost in the music. The room around her faded, the laughter and chatter of the guests becoming distant echoes. There was only her and the violin, her soul pouring into every note. The music was sweet and melancholic, a reflection of everything she had ever longed for. The freedom, the possibility, the dream of standing on a stage and playing for an audience that truly understood. The sadness in the melody was mingled with a quiet hope, a belief that perhaps, One day, she would have the life she had always imagined. When she finished, the room was silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Lisa Lott's heart thudded in her chest, and she slowly opened her eyes, unsure of what to expect. But the looks on the guests' faces were not what she had expected. They weren't mocking her, nor were they filled with disdain. They were stunned, their eyes wide with surprise. Frederick's smirk had disappeared. Instead, he was watching her with an intensity that unsettled her. There was no laughter, no ridicule, just respect. The silence was finally broken by the soft clapping of hands from the woman sitting at Frederick's table. Then, gradually, others joined in. The applause spread, hesitant at first, but growing stronger with every passing second. Lisa Lott stood there, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She had done it. She had stood up to him, and for a moment, she had made them all listen. It was a small victory, but it was hers. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was more than just the invisible girl in the background. And as she looked at Frederick, she saw something else in his eyes, something that wasn't mockery or disdain. It was curiosity, a flicker of something that might just be admiration. That thought stayed with her long after the applause faded away. The next few days passed in a blur for Lisa Lott. The unexpected applause from the other night still echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of the performance that had, in a strange way, shifted something deep inside her. She couldn't quite grasp the significance of it. Why had it felt so monumental? Why had it, in a way, made her feel like her dreams might actually be within reach? Every time she tried to go back to the routine, to forget about the performance and push it to the back of her mind where it belonged, she found herself thinking about it again. The way the room had fallen silent. The looks on the guests' faces as they watched her play. Even Frederick Keller's expression, which had gone from smug amusement to something almost resembling awe, stayed with her. But life had a way of reminding Lisa Lott that she couldn't afford to dwell on dreams. The next day, she was back at the restaurant, slipping into her uniform and tying her apron in place as if nothing had changed. The work was demanding, the guests indifferent as always, but there was a quiet weight on her chest now, a weight that had been missing before. It was as though she had stepped onto a stage and exposed herself for the first time, only to realize that she was capable of much more than she had ever believed. And then, one afternoon, as she was wiping down a table in the quieter corner of the restaurant, her boss, Mr. Muller, called her over. "Lisa Lott, there's someone here to see you," he said curtly, his tone one she didn't often hear. It was a mix of surprise and curiosity, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. No one came looking for her, least of all anyone from outside her world. She followed Mr. Muller into the dining area, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw who was standing there. Frederick Keller. He was sitting at a table near the back, his suit as sharp as ever, his expression unreadable. Beside him was a man she didn't recognize, a distinguished older gentleman who had a certain air about him, one that spoke of authority and experience. As they saw her approach, Frederick stood and nodded toward the man, who smiled faintly at her. "Lisa Lott," Frederick said, his voice steady but with an edge of something unfamiliar. "This is Maestro Klein. He's a conductor, one of the best in Dresden. He's been hearing a lot about you." Lisa Lott felt a strange heat rise to her cheeks as she hesitated. Was he serious? Was she really the topic of conversation for someone like Maestro Klein, who had conducted orchestras across Europe? She had spent so much of her life hidden away in the small apartment, playing her grandfather's violin for no one but herself. The idea that a man like this would be interested in her talent was almost laughable. But before she could voice her disbelief, Maestro Klein spoke. "I must say," he began, his deep voice carrying a certain warmth despite his formal demeanor, "I had the privilege of hearing you play the other night. Your music, it was extraordinary. It spoke to me in a way that I haven't felt in a long time. You have a gift, Lisa Lott." Lisa Lott blinked, trying to comprehend his words. She wasn't sure whether she should laugh or cry. This man, with all his experience and knowledge, was complimenting her. "I don't know what to say," she stammered, feeling her nerves return in full force. I just play for myself. I've never done anything like that before. You've never performed before? Maestro Klein asked, his tone genuinely curious, as if the concept of playing only for oneself was as foreign to him as it was to her. No, Liselotte replied softly. I don't have the means to perform. I can't afford the lessons, the instruments, or the connections. I practice when I can, in my free time. You've been wasting your talent, my dear, Klein said with a laugh, though it wasn't unkind. People like you deserve more. Much more. Frederick, who had been watching this exchange with quiet intensity, finally spoke again. Lieselot, I've seen enough to know that you're capable of far more than just playing in private. Maestro Klein here has offered to help you. He believes in you, and I do too. She turned to look at him, unable to mask her surprise. Frederick Keller, the same man who had humiliated her in front of an entire room. The same man who seemed to treat people like her as nothing more than background figures, was offering her a chance to pursue her dreams? What was happening? I'm not sure I understand, Lieselot said slowly, still reeling from the unexpectedness of it all. Why are you doing this? Frederick smiled faintly, his eyes flickering with something unreadable. Sometimes, the right thing to do becomes clear when you least expect it. I'm offering you this opportunity because you deserve it. You've already proven to me that you have the potential to do something great, Lieselot. This is your chance to see where it can take you. Lieselot couldn't believe it. It was too much, too fast, and yet the possibility of it all hung in the air like an electric charge. She had never expected anything like this. Never thought that someone of his stature would take an interest in someone like her, much less offer a path out of the world she had known her entire life. And yet, as the words sank in, a spark of hope began to grow in her chest. Maybe this wasn't a cruel joke. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Why don't you take some time to think it over? Maestro Klein suggested kindly. I know it's a lot to take in, but I believe you have the talent to go far. Lieselot stood there, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She couldn't fathom how her life had shifted so drastically in such a short amount of time. Just days ago, she had been invisible in the world of the wealthy, a mere server. Now, she was standing here, being offered the chance to study under one of the most respected maestros in Dresden. For a long moment, she didn't say anything, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She thought of her family, of her parents, who had sacrificed so much for her. She thought of the life they had led, struggling to make ends meet, of the years spent wishing for something better. Could she really leave that behind? Could she take the risk of following her dreams, even if it meant stepping into the unknown? Finally, Lieselot nodded, her voice steady but soft. I'll think about it. But I can't promise anything. That's all we ask, Frederick replied with a small smile. Take your time, Lieselot. We'll be here when you're ready. As she walked away, the words hung heavy in her mind. What was she supposed to do now? How could she decide between the life she had always known and the dream she had only dared to whisper to herself? She didn't know yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. The days following the meeting with Frederick Keller and Maestro Klein felt like a strange dream, one that Lieselot couldn't quite wake up from. She found herself constantly replaying their conversation in her mind, the words echoing over and over again. You have a gift, Lieselot. People like you deserve more. But how could it be true? How could she, just a waitress in a small, cramped apartment, have a gift that was worth noticing? The life she had known had been simple and unremarkable, spent moving between tables, serving people who never saw her as anything more than a servant. And yet, here she was being offered a chance to leave all of that behind. Her heart fluttered with excitement, but there was a gnawing uncertainty that kept creeping up on her. Could she really take the leap? Could she risk everything for a dream that had always felt so out of reach? The decision weighed heavily on her as she stood at the counter of the restaurant the next morning, polishing the silverware with a sense of detachment. She knew she couldn't make a decision like this on impulse, but she also knew she couldn't ignore the opportunity either. The very idea of studying under Maestro Klein was intoxicating. What would it be like to be surrounded by professional musicians, to finally learn the proper techniques, to play alongside some of the best, and to know that someone believed in her talent, someone with real knowledge, not just her old memories of playing with her grandfather. As Lisa wiped down the last of the glasses, a small voice in the back of her head spoke up, urging her to take the chance. Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe it was about something bigger, something more meaningful. That night, after another long shift, she finally made her decision. She knew there was no easy way to do this, no simple path forward. But she couldn't stay where she was. Not when a dream, so much larger than anything she had ever dared to imagine, was within her grasp. The next day, Lisa called Maestro Klein. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the number, her breath caught in her throat. But when he answered, his voice warm and welcoming, it was as if a weight lifted from her shoulders. "I've thought about it, Maestro," Lisa said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I want to try. I want to take the opportunity. I'll commit to the training, to everything. I'm ready." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the maestro's voice came through, softer than before, with a note of approval. "Good," he said simply. "I'm glad to hear that, Lisa. This will be a lot of work, but I have no doubt that you'll succeed. Let's start the process. I'll make the arrangements." And just like that, Lisa-Lot's path began to shift. She felt a rush of excitement mixed with a touch of fear, but deep down, she knew it was the right decision. She would study, work hard, and prove to herself, if no one else, that she had what it took. Over the next few weeks, Lisa-Lot's life took on a new rhythm. She continued working at the restaurant, but now it felt like a temporary holdover, a way to keep the bills paid until she could leave it all behind. In the evenings, she practiced more intensely than she ever had before. The maestro had given her a practice schedule, one that was rigorous and demanding, but she welcomed the challenge. She knew it was what she needed. Frederick Keller's presence, which had once been so dismissive and condescending, had become more like an enigma in her life. She hadn't seen him since their encounter in the restaurant, but she knew he was watching. She had seen the way his eyes had followed her when she played that night, as though he was watching something shift in her. She couldn't shake the feeling that he, too, was waiting for something. But what exactly? Why had he chosen to involve himself in her life? What did he want from her, if anything at all? For the first time, she allowed herself to entertain the idea that perhaps Frederick wasn't the villain in her story. There was a subtle complexity to him that she hadn't noticed before. It was clear now that his actions, the invitation to meet Maestro Klein, his insistence that she had more to offer, hadn't been just for show. Something had changed in him, too. But what? She didn't have answers yet, but she was beginning to realize that her path was winding in unexpected ways. A week later, Lisa found herself walking into the rehearsal hall of the orchestra for the first time. Her heart raced as she stepped into the space that seemed to hum with energy. The grand room was filled with musicians tuning their instruments, practicing their parts. It was intimidating, to say the least. She was nothing more than a novice compared to the seasoned professionals around her. They had studied for years, honed their skills, and here she was, an untrained waitress from the outskirts of the city, trying to fit into a world she hadn't even dared to dream of. But as she walked further into the room, Maestro Klein noticed her and gave her an encouraging nod. "Come," he said, "don't stand there. Join the others." She swallowed her nerves and approached a vacant seat near the front, where she took her violin from its case. The instrument felt heavier in her hands now, like a weighty responsibility, but also a source of deep potential. She was determined to prove that she belonged here, despite her lack of formal training. For the next few hours, Lisa practiced with the orchestra, her bow moving over the strings with precision. She didn't play perfectly. There were still rough edges in her technique, but with every passing minute, she felt herself becoming part of the music. The other musicians played their parts effortlessly, their notes blending with hers. The maestro had said it would take time to catch up, but Lisa didn't care. Every time she played, she felt the music come alive beneath her fingers, filling her with the confidence that, perhaps, she could become part of this world. She could do it, if only she kept pushing herself. When the rehearsal ended, Maestro Klein approached her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You're doing well," he said, his voice low but warm. "You have a natural ability, Lieselot. I can see it." Lieselot's heart swelled with pride at his words. She had worked hard for this moment, but hearing it from someone like him felt like the validation she had been seeking her entire life. "I won't stop," she replied, her voice steady despite the excitement that threatened to overwhelm her. "I won't let you down." He gave her a knowing smile, then turned toward the other musicians. "We'll see you next week. Keep practicing. You got something special." As Lieselot packed up her violin, her mind raced with the possibilities. She had a long road ahead of her, one filled with challenges and obstacles, but for the first time in a long while, she felt certain that she was on the right path. Her journey was just beginning, but it was already taking her places she had never imagined. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into the restaurant weeks ago, unsure of her place in the world. She was becoming someone new, someone who belonged in this world of music. And the best part? She was no longer invisible. Now, she had something worth fighting for, and nothing, not even the shadow of doubt, could take that away from her. The days blurred into weeks, each one more challenging than the last. Lieselot threw herself into her training with a relentless dedication that surprised even herself. The hours at the orchestra hall were long, the lessons grueling, but there was a fire within her now, a burning desire to prove that she had a place among the best. She could feel the growth in her playing, though it was a slow and painful process. Every note, every shift of her fingers on the strings felt like a small victory. The maestro had a way of pushing her beyond what she thought was possible, demanding more precision, more emotion, more control. His critiques were tough, but they were exactly what she needed. The other musicians, once distant and intimidating, began to warm to her as well. They were surprised at how quickly she had caught up, considering her lack of formal training. Lieselot had her moments of self-doubt, of course. There were times when she felt like an imposter, like she didn't belong in a world so far removed from the one she had known. But every time she picked up her violin, the music told her she was right where she was supposed to be. The final breakthrough came one evening during a particularly demanding rehearsal. The orchestra was preparing for a performance at one of the city's most prestigious venues. Lieselot had been practicing tirelessly, but she still struggled with the fast-paced sections of the piece. Maestro Klein had been watching her closely, and as the session reached its final moments, he called her over. "Lieselot," he said, his voice firm but encouraging. "I know this piece is difficult for you, but you're almost there. You made incredible progress. Don't let the fear of messing up stop you. You have the ability to master this. Now, show me your confidence." His words struck deep within her, as if unlocking something she hadn't known was there. Confidence. It had always been the hardest part for her. She had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, believing she wasn't good enough, that she didn't have a right to stand in the spotlight. But now, with the maestro's words in her ears and the weight of the violin in her hands, Lieselot understood. It wasn't about perfection. It was about giving herself fully to the music. She needed to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. The next day, Lieselot arrived early at the concert hall, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. She had never performed in front of such a large audience, and though she had played many times in front of small crowds at rehearsals, nothing compared to the pressure of the upcoming performance. The hall was magnificent, with towering ceilings and rows upon rows of empty seats, all waiting for the music to fill them. The stage was grand, and Lieselot could feel the weight of it on her shoulders as she stepped into the spotlight. She set up her violin, her fingers trembling slightly, but she forced herself to take a deep breath. She was ready. She had trained for this moment. As the orchestra began, the music enveloped her. The opening notes of the piece surged through her body, and Lieselot found herself swept up in the rhythm. Her bow moved confidently over the strings, the melody flowing effortlessly from her. For the first time, there was no self-doubt, no hesitation. She was no longer the shy waitress or the unsure girl from the small apartment. She was a musician, a part of something much bigger than herself. The audience, hidden in the shadows of the hall, seemed to disappear. All that mattered was the music, the way it coursed through her, carrying her away from everything but the sound of her violin and the pulse of the orchestra behind her. Lisa Lott let the music lead her, trusting in the hours of practice that had brought her here, in the support of the maestro who had believed in her from the beginning. As the piece came to a close, the final notes ringing out in a vast space, Lisa Lott's heart raced. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. She stood there, still holding her violin, waiting for the applause that she had once only dreamed of. And then, as if on cue, the audience erupted into applause. Lisa Lott blinked, startled by the sudden rush of sound, the clapping echoing through the hall. It was a roar of approval, loud and unrelenting. She had done it. She had conquered the stage. The maestro was already on his feet, a proud smile on his face as he applauded her. And then, to her surprise, she caught sight of someone else standing in the front row, someone who hadn't been there before. Frederick Keller. He was clapping too, his hands meeting with the rest of the audience's in appreciation. But there was something different about his gaze as it met hers. The smirk that had once been a part of his usual demeanor was gone, replaced with something more sincere: respect. He was looking at her like she was no longer just the invisible girl in the background, but a true artist in her own right. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity, but Lisa Lott barely noticed it now. She was caught in the overwhelming flood of emotions that washed over her. The fear, the doubts, the years of working behind the scenes, all of it had led to this moment. And now, standing there in front of the audience, with the lights shining down on her, Lisa Lott knew that she had earned her place. She had shown the world, and herself, that she was more than just a waitress. She was a violinist. The evening's performance was a turning point in Lisa Lott's life. After the concert, as the audience slowly trickled out of the hall, she found herself standing backstage, still reeling from the experience. It was hard to believe that everything she had worked for had culminated in such a moment. As she made her way back to her dressing room, she saw Frederick approaching her, his expression softer than it had ever been. He stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "You were amazing," he said, his voice sincere. "I have to admit, I never expected this. You've turned this city on its head tonight, Lisa Lott." She smiled, still breathless from the performance, her emotions still raw. "Thank you, Mr. Keller," she said, the formality slipping from her tongue more naturally than she had expected. "It means more than you can know." He nodded, and for the first time, Lisa Lott saw something in him that she hadn't seen before, a glimmer of respect, not just for her music, but for her as a person. "I know this probably doesn't mean much," he said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant, "but I was wrong about you, Lisa Lott. You're more than just a waitress. You're a true artist. I hope you know that." Her heart swelled at his words. They were simple, but they carried so much weight. She nodded, unsure of what to say in response. Before he turned to leave, Frederick hesitated for a moment. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her with a small, almost reluctant smile. "I know you'll need this for the next steps in your career," he said, his tone a little more businesslike now. "This is just a small donation for me. For your future. I believe in you, Lisa Lott." Lisa Lott took the envelope, surprised by the generosity, but not fully understanding what it meant. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it, revealing a check made out for an amount that could change her life, an amount that would allow her to pursue her music without worry for the first time in years. "Thank you, Mr. Keller," she whispered, the gratitude evident in her voice. She could barely find the words, but he just gave her a small nod, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer before he turned and walked away. Lisa Lott stood there, the envelope in her hands, the sound of the applause still ringing in her ears. She had made it. She had taken the leap, and the world was finally starting to see her for who she truly was. Her journey wasn't over. It had just begun. But as she walked out into the night, the future felt brighter than it ever had before. She was no longer just a waitress. She was Lisa Lott, the violinist, and nothing would stop her from following her dreams.